Hey there, Kristen. Looks like you and I are the early birds. You probably noticed you're muted. We just mute folks until the speakers join us. So if you have anything for the Q&A, submit it to the chat. Hi, Linda. Thanks for joining us. You're one of our early birds. As I tell everybody, you're on mute until the Q&A. So if you have a question, please feel free to put it in the chat. I don't know if y'all can hear my cat playing with her toy in the background, but sorry for ambient noise there. Kristen, I saw your comment. It looks like she got bored with that toy, so hopefully it's a little quieter. Hi, Galen. I was just telling Kristen and Linda as people join, everybody's on mute, but if you have questions, submit them to the chat and we will open that up for the Q&A. Hi, Brian. Brian, you just missed Mimi's feature on this call. She was making lots of fun noise a few minutes ago. Hi, Mike. All right, folks, so we've got a few minutes before things get going, but we'll be as prompt as possible, just waiting for our speakers to join us. The early birds have already heard this announcement, but please, at any time, if you have questions for our speakers or for the EI staff, go ahead and submit those to the chat function at any time, and we will open that up at the end of the conversation. All right, welcome, Justin. Thanks for joining us. We'll unmute you in just a second once we get the other speakers in the room. Hi, Stevie. Thanks for being here. We'll also unmute you in just a moment. Sure the representative will be here soon. Let's see. I'm just going to give Representative Robinson just one more second here. And while we do that, I'm going to go ahead and kick things off on my end since I just am going to get the show started. So my name is Emily Boyce. I am the Development Director at Equality Illinois. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am calling in today from Logan Square in Chicago. Folks who are speaking today, if you don't mind also sharing your pronouns and where you're calling from, that would be greatly appreciated. Also want to mention, I know Miles Brady Davis, our communication director, couldn't join the call today, but I know they would want me to mention that you can always reference Equality Illinois' COVID-19 Resource Center on our website. We'll be sure to share that link in the follow-up email for a bunch of resources and things that might be of interest to anybody who's joining. With that, I'm going to kick it off with our CEO, Brian Johnson, who will then pass it off to our policy director, Mike Ziri. So Brian, you are being unmuted at the moment.
Wonderful. Well, I'm happy to see everybody, and I'm excited for this conversation. So thank you for joining our weekly town hall with 3 exemplary guests. You know, as always, I like to just remind us where we want to be at the end of this call. You know, we've created these weekly gatherings in part to really connect our community to concrete resources and information, to bridge our stakeholders with experts in the field, and finally to just reinforce this connectedness that we have as a community, enabling us to gather even when so few of us can gather in person. Few housekeeping things, and for those of you that are experts on this call, I kind of think Pat Ewart might be able to give these housekeeping notices for me. I've seen her here almost every week, but you know, one is these calls are open, and that includes open to the media. So if you do not want your voice or name or likeness shared, please make sure you change your name and stop your video now. We're excited for you to listen in, but we also want to honor what level of openness you want in your engagement. Today's town hall is going to go until about 2:30. So the way it's going to run is Mike is going to introduce our guests, start off a couple of conversations with our guests, and then open it to the public. I encourage at any time from this moment on, if you have a question for our guests, put it in the chat, and Emily will be calling individuals, as many as she can, near the in the Q&A section to make sure that she unmutes them and allows you to ask your question directly. But the earlier you get it in, the more likely it is that you'll be able to have your question answered. And then finally, as facilitators of this conversation, we want to make sure that this is an open, robust, honest dialogue, and at the same time that we are respecting everybody here and creating an inclusive, safe, and respectful environment. So if at any point we deem somebody is not engaging according to those values, we will remove you from the meeting. And we haven't had to do that yet. I'm now going to introduce someone who needs no introduction in this world, Mike Ziri, our Equality Illinois Policy Director, to take it from here. Mike.
Hey, everyone. Hey, thanks, Brian. Make sure I'm unmuted. Yes, I am. All right, always got to be sure. It's great to be with everyone today and our guest speakers on a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. Especially as someone who spends a lot of time in Springfield working with our legislative champions. It's clear how important elections are. And we know that LGBT legal equality in Illinois has been achieved through the little d democratic process and through those traditions. And that the representation that we have, the allyship among elected officials, and the leadership in state and local governments, we have those things because of the electoral engagement of LGBTQ people and our allies. And that engagement, as I said, is built on democratic processes and norms where every vote matters. And now, as I think we've seen in the last few weeks, the last few months, the last few years, those processes, those norms, and those rights are under attack, not just by a pandemic, but by deliberate policies throughout the country that are meant to obstruct access to who can vote and to fair elections. And so with this upcoming election, we have to take it very seriously, especially the preservation of democratic norms, structures, and processes. And, you know, we hear it often, but I think this is quite possibly one of the most important, if not the most important elections of our lifetime. And we at Equality Illinois can't convey enough the importance of electoral engagement for LGBTQ folks. And we look forward to learning today about ways we can ensure that our community can exercise the right to vote, can be electorally engaged while remaining safe and healthy. And I look forward to hearing from our speakers today. We have 3 of them, and I'm so excited to introduce them all because they're all just really amazing, and the work they do is amazing. I'll do introductions first, and then I've got a few questions, and we'll kick it off. First, elected in 2018, State Representative Lamont Robinson of Illinois' 5th District became the first openly gay state legislator in the history of the Illinois General Assembly. And in that time, in the year and so months he's been there, he has already done some amazing work. He was the chief sponsor of legislation last year, which is now law, to ensure that youth in Illinois are able to access preventative treatments like PrEP without burden. And we applaud Representative Robinson and the AIDS Foundation of Chicago for leading on this important initiative. And he was also chief co-sponsor of a bill that we worked very closely, and we worked on the inclusive curriculum law to include LGBTQ history in Illinois public schools. So we're really excited to have State Representative Robinson with us today. Stevie Valles has committed his entire career to making sure all people have a voice and are welcomed as equals. Currently serves as the executive director of Chicago Votes. Stevie joined Chicago Votes after working as the national campaigns director for the Alliance for Youth Action. And in addition to this experience, he worked in the United States Senate, the Texas legislature, and on a slew of campaigns ranging from presidential, gubernatorial, and affording housing initiatives. So welcome, Stevie. And we have Justin Valles, the policy director at Asian Americans Advancing Justice Chicago. Justin brings a decade of experience in community building, grassroots organizing, and leading legislative policy change around issues of economic justice, health equity, and immigrant rights. And in his role at Asian Americans Advancing Justice, Justin leads work on policy issues impacting democracy, immigration, language justice, and racial equity. So thank you, the 3 of you, for joining us today. I'm really excited for the conversation. I'm just gonna start by asking you some introductory questions. You've seen the questions, but I'll just share them with everyone. You know, first question, we're concerned about the safety and health of both voters and poll workers. We've seen what happened in Wisconsin last primary election. You talk about the ways that folks can safely exercise their vote and or recommend safe ways to engage in-person voting at polling places, especially as there's been a lot of discussion about expanded vote by mail. And linked to that also, as I mentioned, Wisconsin, we saw that a vast majority of polling places in Milwaukee were closed last month because of the pandemic, which resulted in long lines, long waits, a stark lack of access in communities of color. How can Illinois protect access to the vote for all Illinoisans in 2020 and going forward? And then would love to know your thoughts. That we've talked about why 2020 is a critical election for this country, without maybe addressing specific races or candidates, since we're 501c3. Can you share with folks why you feel they should participate this election cycle and why this election is so important? I am gonna stop talking now because we're gonna hear from our great panelists. Whoever one of you wants to go first, we'd love to hear from you. All right, I call on Stevie first.
Hey everyone, Stevie Valles, he, him, his. I'm executive director at Chicago Votes, talking to you all from Westtown. Real quick shout out to the WBEZ mug that you just stood from. That's a cool mug. I got the Skyline one. I really want that one. So just quick sidebar. So in terms of the elections, yeah, so Chicago votes, it's kind of insinuated in our name that we take elections very serious. Um, Last year, we were fortunate enough to be a part of a 2-year campaign to turn the Cook County Jail into a polling location. And in March, just before society got shut down, we had our first elections inside the Cook County Jail, the weekend just before everything got shut down. But I do want to note that there were a lot of polling locations that were closed in Chicago as a result to COVID-19, especially that second weekend of early voting and heading into election day. We were fortunate that a lot of people still turned out and voted. We were fortunate that a lot of people took advantage of absentee ballots. And we were fortunate that our election was already kind of moving ahead before everything got shut down. So we kind of had momentum. But I say all that to say that these are real concerns heading into November. We at Chicago Votes are really focused on making sure that there's opportunity for community groups and community members to have dialogue with election authorities here in Chicago. So we're not only pushing them to ensure that they are setting up the elections in an equitable way, but working with them because they, like nonprofits and like many other government agencies, are not as well funded as they should be or could be in order to make it easier for us all to vote. So we're first trying to make sure that there's like lines of communications between community groups and election authorities so everybody's perspective is understood and represented. We're focusing on making sure there's robust public education around this campaign. We're going to be doing a number of different things as Chicago Votes to ensure that people and low propensity and drop off voters know how they can cast a ballot this election. There's going to likely be robust opportunity for absentee ballots, whether that is a universal online portal to request an absentee ballot, everybody receiving a invitation or a absentee ballot request form of some sort so people can request absentee ballots. But this will be the first time that a lot of people have voted by mail. And since we focus on young people, specifically young people of color, we understand that our target demographic is very transient. So mail just doesn't necessarily work for everyone. So we're also hoping to make sure that, well, we're going to be pushing, like you mentioned, to ensure that there is in-person voting. We are working to ensure that the options for in-person voting are safe. Things like robust, like making sure there's a lot of hand sanitizer, making sure there's plexiglass stations set up between election judges and voters, making sure there's gloves, making sure polling booths are certain distances apart from each other, trying to expand the hours for early voting, trying to expand the days for early voting so people can have more of an opportunity to cast a ballot earlier so the election stations aren't overwhelmed on election day. Things like ballot drop boxes so people can, drop their ballot off in case they don't want to mail it back or in case they don't want to go into a polling location, like making sure those opportunities are there. And, one of the reasons why there are so many polling locations closed on election day and the elections in Chicago during the primary is because most election judges are over the age of 60, and which means most election judges are part of that at-risk community of contracting COVID-19. So one of the ways that Chicago Votes is going to help to make sure we have safe and healthy elections is recruiting young election judges. We have a lot of young people in high schools and colleges, creatives that we work with, people who just need jobs. And we're going to be doing a robust outreach effort to recruit young people to be election judges, to take that unneeded pressure off of the shoulders of our older and aging population so they aren't at risk of contracting this virus. So, And it's important to vote because democracy, like literally, if you don't vote, we won't know if democracy actually works. And America is the third worst voting democracy in the world. We disenfranchise more people than any other democracy in the world by way of the criminal justice system. And so this promise of democracy has never fully materialized. And it won't unless people at least take the time out of their day to cast a ballot and make sure their voices are represented. So in a very vague sense, I can go into like a whole philosophical conversation there. I've been sitting at home by myself a lot thinking, so I'll leave it there.
Great, thank you, Stevie. Representative Robinson, I see you now. I would love to hear from you, and then Justin.
Mike, thank you for allowing me this opportunity. Thank you for the work that you do 365 days a year with Equality Illinois. You guys have certainly been my to-go-to group as I am trying to make sure that I look at priorities that affect the African American and Latino communities. And so thank you so very much. And also administering this call. I also want to give kudos to Chicago Votes for also all of the work that you guys are doing 365 days a year, and also making sure that you're focusing in on our youth, which is extremely important. We forget that, but and we could be preaching to the choir on this call, but we all know the importance of voting for a couple different reasons. Number one, we know that the person that's occupying the White House right now absolutely, unequivocally has to go. And personally, I do believe that the crisis that we're in, we could have prepared for if we would have had better leadership with the person that occupies the White House. So with that said, that is even more reason that we have to make sure that we get out to vote, that we particularly get our young people out to vote. This is a great reason that we need to be galvanizing our communities to get out to vote. And then also, more of us need to also become election judges. It was just referenced that most election judges are over 60. And, we could be in a situation where this COVID pandemic does come back. And if that being the case, then we all need to step up. Those of us that are under 60, we really do need you to step up and be election judges, because it works both ways. We're trying to get people to vote, but we also have to make sure that things are in place for people to vote, i.e. having election judges, number one. Number two is making sure that people understand that they don't have to go vote on election day, that they can do early voting, they can mail in, and or there will be stations set up where places where you could actually drop off your ballot. So you don't have to actually mail in your ballot. There will be places again that you can drop off that particular ballot. And so there are a lot of different ways that the state of Illinois, along with the Board of Elections, is trying its best to make sure that no one is left out from being able to vote. Because not only are we in a crisis right now during this pandemic, but we're in a crisis at the federal level, knowing that we have to get new leadership at the top. And so again, it is extremely imperative that we work with Equality Illinois and Chicago Votes and other groups to make sure that we get out information during social media, our community organizations, our churches. We have to have everyone's input to make sure that we have robust numbers around voting this election coming up.
Great, thank you, Representative. And Justin.
Thanks again to everyone at Equality Illinois for inviting me to join, and for Representative Robinson and for Stevie. Great to be on here with you. My name is Justin Valles. I'm the Policy Director over at Asian Americans Advancing Justice Chicago, where we build power through organizing and collective advocacy to achieve racial equity I use he/him pronouns, and I am out of Albany Park rather than our usual uptown offices. I think a lot of the policy questions have already been covered around what we're seeing and what we're thinking about, partly because we work really closely with Chicago Votes and the Just Democracy Coalition, but thinking about like how voters can stay safe and really participate robustly this November. Ensuring that folks that are able to and interested in voting by mail have enough opportunity and access to do that. Going through the local election authority to make sure that you're able to request the form and or request your ballot, make sure you get the ballot delivered and turned back around in time is important. Highlighting the options for early voting in person helps to stretch out sort of the time period where we're seeing a lot of folks showing up while still participating robustly. And by using both of those, we also help sort of spread out the flow of folks, so that way we don't have as many folks trying to go in all at once. And so I think that also helps to address some questions. Really important for us is addressing and maintaining safe in-person voting options. Thinking about like what are the sanitizing things that we're providing at polling places. How far apart are we spacing booths? Do our election judges have the required PPE to keep safe while they're cleaning and sorting ballots and helping us through the election process? Even down to small things like if you're going to early voting, bring your own pen, right? Rather than having to go back and forth is just one less thing or one less potential issue. One thing that's a chief concern for advancing justice with Asian American communities, we're an incredibly linguistically diverse community. And advancing justice actually runs one of the largest multilingual election protection programs in the state, where every election we're out there making sure that folks that are eligible to vote in languages other than English are able to access their ballots and get the interpretation services that they need. It's been a great partnership with election authorities and with community members, bringing in young folks who want to make sure that the rest of our community is able to fully exercise their franchise. And I think one of the questions and concerns that I think is important for us to keep in mind as we make changes and adjustments to this really different election cycle is how we're protecting voters that speak languages other than English, right? So if I'm gonna request to vote by mail, am I gonna get an English ballot, or am I gonna get my ballot in Hindi, Chinese, or Spanish? Adding to that is an incredible win that we had last year in Cook County, not including Chicago. The vote ordinance actually expanded the language access to even more languages for communities. But we want to make sure that folks are actually getting access to that information without a whole lot of back and forth, right? And so are we asking folks, what language do you want your ballot materials or your ballot in? It is one helpful way to make sure that that first attempt to get a ballot is successful, right? It also, I think, helps with forecasting what preparations do we need from in-person voting, not just for 2020, but going forward. And it just helps improve sort of the experience for multilingual communities across the state. And I know a lot of people say it, but every election is super important because the moment that we're in is also a culmination of decisions that have been made. And I think what's really transformative and important about November's election is the opportunity for us to look at the situation that we're facing and really help chart a course of who's going to represent, who's going to help make those decisions going forward to lead us through this crisis. Yeah, and with that, I'll gladly pass it back.
Sorry, Mike. I thought you were unmuted, but I don't know if you were. Thank you, all three of you. That was really useful. I feel like it already brought up ideas and considerations I hadn't even thought about, so I'm learning a lot already. I want to start by asking something that we're curious about from all three of your perspectives, which is what's going on in Springfield or in other venues. Are any of you aware of legislation currently being proposed to protect democracy and voting rights in Illinois? And what do you think voters in our audience need to know about any of that that's going on? I'll start with the representative if there's any thoughts you have just to kick the ball rolling.
Sure, thank you, Emily. There are several bills that are out around voting and voting rights. I'm sorry I don't have any bill numbers in front of me. I will suggest this, that wherever you live, to the viewers, if you could please, if you don't know who your state rep and your state senator is, please go to openstates.com, put in your address, and reach out to your legislators, your senator, your state rep. Email them. You'll on our website. We each have phone numbers. We each have email addresses. Please email us your concerns about voting rights. We need to hear from you. If you're not for sure where your legislator stands on the issue, please email your legislators and let them know where you stand and what you would like to see. And so again, there's several bills around voting. I will tell you, I was just on a call a little earlier, a House call. Our first priority, of course, is the budget, and also making sure that we are trying to flatten the curve around COVID. And there could be some legislation that comes up around voting in this session that is going to start on tomorrow. I'll actually be traveling to Springfield after this call. And so I'm not 100% sure if it will come up because of the priority being the budget and surrounding COVID. But personally, it is certainly something that is important, particularly in minority communities. We need to make sure that if someone wants to vote, that they have access to voting. And so Emily, I hope that I answered your question. If I could clarify anything, please let me know.
No, that's great. Thank you, Representative. Stevie, do you have anything to add? I don't know if Chicago Votes is working on anything right now. I'm trying to unmute you, but I don't know if I can. There you go.
Yeah, so similar to what the representative says, Chicago Votes is trying to influence what's happening in Springfield as the outside organizing advocates. We're working very closely with the Just Democracy Coalition to try to, just offer up the perspective of our diverse coalition. So as the legislators are considering whatever bill that they consider, our voices are represented in those conversations. So that includes circulating like the one pagers, and I'll send that to you as well, Rep, so you have it. That also includes, we'll be doing some social media outreach, just uplifting, what we want to make sure is considered in the legislation, and just following closely along. And then beyond that, I think it's really important when you're in this advocacy space to understand that once a bill is written, once a bill is passed, that really is the beginning of the work. The implementation side of it is so important. So in addition to, trying to inform the legislature as best as we can in these trying times, we're working with our local election officials who are going to be ultimately spearheading, implementing whatever is decided at the state level to ensure, like I mentioned earlier, that the community voices remain included in the process, and that whatever decisions are made and whatever process is set up for the elections, that here in Chicago, for young people, specifically young people of color, that it is equitable and accessible.
Great. Thank you, Stevie. Justin, anything to add?
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would add is I think we're also trying to take a look at what are the legislative fixes, but what are also some administrative fixes, and where things kind of authorized, or where can we work on things that are in practice that don't need legislation. And so both of those, and regularly contacting your elected officials to let them know what you're thinking and where you're at.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that from all of you. And before we open it up to Q&A, I know we've got a couple questions and a bunch of like helpful resources in the chat. So I'm gonna start running through that. But I know Brian had a little addition from Equality Illinois as well.
Yeah, I just want to make a plug for two ways in which this election is really historic and matters more than most. So number one is we have more openly LGBTQ candidates running for the state House and state Senate, the General Assembly, than we've ever had in our history. And I think that is absolutely critical. We want to send a message that we should be at the table where decisions are made about our communities writ large. And I think making sure we show up to vote really matters. I know there are people on our town halls, like my friend Maggie Trevor, who knows exactly what I'm talking about. You know, we have a chance to elect the first openly trans individual who's running for a judgeship, and I think these are really critical. So that's number one. Number two is the people we elect to serve us in Springfield this November will be the people that draw the maps that determine our districts for the next 10 years. So if you want to make sure that we have fair districts, good electoral maps that reflect our values, we need to make sure that the right people are at the table. And we have seen what happens in other states when people use a very parochial self-interest to draw up maps, and how that can deeply disenfranchise people. So I think people should vote in every single election. If you only were going to vote in one election every decade, this is the one. So that's my plug.
Thanks, Brian. So I saw a comment from Dave Bentland, thank you, Dave, pointing out that ISU students have stepped up to be election judges and they want to be a part of the solution that's going on here. And that, you know, he was just pointing that out, but it posed a question in my head of like, with campuses being probably looking very different in the fall this year, do you all have different, you know, organizing strategies for youth on campus that might not have been what you would typically do in an election year with those types of places? Stevie, you're nodding, so I'm gonna start with you.
All righty. Yeah, we are. So every year we run a number of different leadership development programs where we bring in young people from different walks of life, teach them the ins and outs about organizing and politics and civics, and give them the tools they need to work with their communities to turn them out to vote or to pass an issue, whatever the focus is of the leadership development program in any given year. This year, the focus is turning people out to vote, making sure people are educated about the changes that are going to happen in the election, and making sure that young people are at the table and informing those changes. But the entire program is going to be ran remotely. So we have a number of students, we're going through the interview process right now, but we have a number of students, I'd say a vast majority of those students are from college campuses. And are thinking very deliberately about how they can engage their peers on their college campus. And we've set up standing infrastructure that allows people to reach out to their peers remotely from the comfort of their couch. We're doing weekly phone and text banks, social media banks. We have a weekly Instagram live interview series called Shit Talks, where we talk to different creatives, young people, elected officials about the issues of today, just to make sure there's opportunity for public education. And we are going to be giving folks access to a tool called Outvote that will allow them to text and engage their peers in meaningful ways. I think most young people operate in a digital space anyway. I think a lot of this stuff we're learning, since we work with young people, a lot of this stuff is more intuitive than I think a lot of people realize for the bases that we work with. And frankly, my staff is functioning at a higher level, and being far more innovative and far more creative about the ways that they're reaching out to folks. So I'm pretty confident in what the tactics are going to look like and how effective they're going to be, but it is going to be completely different. But you know, I'm pretty optimistic. I'm looking forward to seeing how it all pans out.
I love any optimism, Stevie. Thank you for that so much. Representative, do you have anything to add specifically around outreach and organizing on college campuses or with the youth vote this year under these conditions?
I think it's important. Is one of the reasons that we're on this call, because we really state level be sending out a note, and I certainly would love to work with Stevie on this. Maybe drafting a letter to each college president and in the state, and asking them to ask their students to be election judges. I think that's a great idea. I certainly think that we have the leverage at the state level to at least engage our state colleges, but this is something that we should probably do across the entire state, whether it be our community colleges, our private and public colleges. And so again, I think that through this call, I learned something, which is great. And I think that we definitely need to engage our youth. And by doing this, by engaging them, we'll also engage their peers. And so again, I think it's a smart idea, and I would love to work with Equality Illinois and Chicago Votes on that effort.
Thank you, Representative. Justin, anything to add from your perspective?
No, I just think it's super crucial for us to look at this opportunity of folks having a little bit more capacity to plug in, especially if they're home instead of on campus, or for folks that are participating in campus remotely to plug in. And I think feels kind of like repetitive for me, but I think especially folks with those language skills, because I think as we see changes in who's able to be election judges, that also changes who's able to provide some of that in-language service. During the primary, there were actually a few high schoolers that were doing the interpretation service. And I thought that was just like a really cool way to see young folks be involved in the process and helping their community exercise their rights. So.
Yeah, I'll echo that. My primary voting experience, I actually had a high school student help me do day of registration at my polling place. So definitely appreciate the young folks who are getting out there and doing that. I'm going to ask Jim to kind of flip the paradigm around. We're now going to have a question about the other side of the voting scale. Jim, I'm going to unmute you now.
Oh, hello. Well, it somehow happened that I kept breathing and entered my 60s. And so the question is, you know, how can those of us that need to be more quarantined and socially separated really participate and try to get out the vote? For example, when I campaigned for Lori Lightfoot, I really targeted senior citizens because I had very especially crafted messages to reach that demographic. I think would be very useful with this next election. So really, I got some chat responses, but it would be great if there could be some sort of targeted communication to people in their 60s and older around very specific actions they can take.
Thanks, Jim. Justin, since you were last time, I'm going to put you on the spot first. Anything you would recommend for that demographic that specifically for safety reasons needs to be quarantined at this time?
Yeah, I mean, I think one, making sure that they're participating and that their friends are also engaged, that they're doing the research on what issues are going to be on the ballot, and also how to request those absentee mail ballots is super helpful. I think every person has that network of folks that they can interact with and influence, and I think just having those vocal advocates to share around turnout, around how to be that trusted resource around, like, well, I don't want to go in person, or what time is in person, can I do early voting? And just having someone that's like read up and ready to help answer some of those questions is a super powerful way to stay involved and really help influence.
Yeah, great. Stevie, I know y'all are focused on the youth, but we know this demographic is also super important. Any thoughts on how they can help both show up and get their friends and family engaged?
Yes. So like I mentioned earlier, all of our volunteer opportunities are going to be remote. And
Mhm.
those volunteer opportunities are not reserved to young people. Um, in fact, in the Cook County Jail, when we launched the program, I'd say 80% of our volunteers were 50 plus. So we definitely create space for our more elder young people because we're all young at heart. So there's there's always a way to plug in with any of those existing programs that I mentioned earlier for everyone. One of the things I've been really struggling with, and I think we're going to try to do a fundraising push, is the reality that a lot of 60-plus-year-olds rely on the resources that they get from being an election judge. And it's like something that's constantly turning in the back of my mind. I really want to work with some folks to do a concentrated fundraising push to just provide them with that supplemental income so they could stay home, send them some food, just take the election off, let us handle it this time around, as a sort of a gesture of respect. But we always are thinking about that, and hopefully we can build some more innovative and cool ways to engage our elder community heading into the election.
Yeah, and Stevie, I'll just note that I think you saw in the chat, just for everybody who's not necessarily paying attention to that, Outvote, the platform you mentioned, is getting big snaps. So folks should check that out. Representative Robinson, do you have anything else to add on that topic?
That as Stevie mentioned, maybe we reverse and we do something for them this time around during the election. Currently, I have a volunteer push to reach out to all of the seniors in my district during this COVID crisis, and it's something that we can do as well. We can volunteer, get a list, and call seniors around voting, and make sure that not only did they receive their ballot, and also get the friends and their friends to be able to vote as well, particularly in senior buildings. And so again, I think that I hate to use the example of going back to the basics, but sometimes we have to do that. And again, that could be just, calling our seniors to check on them, and then also letting them know, hey, are there any resources that you need or that we can help you with in order for you to be able to go out and vote.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let me see. I was gonna check on Terry Cosgrove if you are there. Sorry, one moment, everybody. I'm getting a couple new messages. I wanted to see if, actually, you know what? Sorry, folks, my window is messing up here. I had a question for you, Terry. 1 second. Yes. I just want to see from a personal PAC's perspective why this year's election matters. If you could speak on that, we would really appreciate it. And I'll try to unmute you now. 1 moment. I hope Terry's still there. Sometimes it takes me a while to find people. Oh, there you are. Terry, if you're with us, I just unmuted you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to point out in the conversation about elections is that up until recently, and I know Mike can attest to this, we spent so much time battling anti-LGBT legislation as well as anti-choice legislation. It's only been recently that we've been able to pass things in the General Assembly by the thinnest of margins. I mean, I know Mike keeps track of the roll calls on LGBTQ issues more than I do, but I know on reproductive rights, we have won these votes by the slimmest of margins. HB 40 passed by 2 votes, the RHA by 4 votes in the House. And in 2018, we were able to flip 6 seats from the anti-side to our side on these issues. So all I wanted to really point out to people that these 6 people are up for election again this time. And we have approximately 10 House seats that we're targeting right now that I think Quality and Purcell Pack are on the same side. And I'm not getting political here, but I just want to point out to people that the stakes are very, very high at the state level. And I know we have an existential threat at the presidential level, but here at the state level, as someone who spent more than a few decades fighting all the most horrible anti-choice and anti-LGBT bills, the thought of going back to that era where we put all of our energy, all of our time, and all of our money into just fighting bad stuff and not moving forward at all. I can't even imagine going back that way. But one bad election in the Illinois General Assembly, just like has happened in so many other states, and we keep doing that. So people engaged is really important. So thank you for having this, and congratulations to Lamont again for great election victory and re-election. Thank you.
Thanks, Terry. I'm going to close it out with one final question from our very own Mike Ziri. I know he's got a couple of them on deck, so we'll see what he chooses to share with the group. Mike?
All right. And I think this actually is really it's a question for Stevie based on something you said earlier. But I know there was another question in the comments as well. So from one of our great viewers, so kind of tie it together. You mentioned the voting in jails legislation, which is now law. I know that was an initiative of Chicago Votes. And you talked about what that looked like in this primary in March. So, a couple of questions from that. One, what was the response in the primary at the Cook County Jail? How, there's a lot of folks on here from across the state. How can they work with their, local jails to make sure this happens there? And then the question I saw also in the chat is, what is this, what is voting in jails going to look like to be safe and inclusive in November, because we see the problems that are happening in the jails right now with COVID-19. So kind of a 3-pronged question there, but would love your thoughts on that, since that the bill is, I know, the major initiative of Chicago Votes.
Yeah. You all can hear me, right?
Yeah.
I've been fighting with this mute thing all day. I appreciate you asking that question. The response was great. One of the main reasons we wanted to pass this law was so polling machines can be in the jail. And the reason why having polling machines in the jail was so important is so that people in the jail could utilize same-day voter registration.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to the machines being in the jail, we used to go into the jail and run an absentee ballot chase program, which requires us asking everybody who's detained there to to first register to vote, to request a ballot, and then we would come back and facilitate like an in-person election simulation for them. So we partnered with the Board of Elections and the clerk's office. We set up these cardboard booths. It was really cool. But it didn't get to the core issue of people not being able to utilize same-day voter registration. And the reason that's important is because the jail population is very transient. And if somebody misses a voter registration deadline, if somebody misses the deadline to request a ballot, then they just can't vote. And we just didn't feel like that it was fair. And I had the assessment pretty early on, like if they could do same-day voter registration, I guarantee more people would vote. So in this past election, the total number of people who voted from Chicago, we're still getting the Cook numbers, was between 1,500 and 1,600 voters. That's up from 500 typically from the jail who vote. And what's even more important is 797 of them utilized same-day voter registration. So more people use same-day voter registration than had been traditionally voting in the jail, which goes to show that this was needed. So now onto a more somber note, how is this going to work in this election? As all of you probably know, jails, like correctional facilities in general, are major hotspots for spreading this virus. I think the number now is like 3 to 5 people already between staff and people detained in the Cook County Jail have died. The last I saw an estimate, they said they were estimating like 1 out of every 40 people in the jail were likely to have the virus. And there's about 4,000 people inside the Cook County Jail right now. So we definitely are going to probably have to use absentee ballots of some sort. It's going to be very difficult for us to get election judges in the jail when it's a hot spot. It's dangerous to bring people into the jail when it's a hot spot. And right now, to be perfectly honest, we're trying to figure out this legislative component of it, trying to figure out the larger election component of it, and then trying to figure out the jail component of it, which we're just taking it one step at a time. Hopefully there is a way that we can do this that doesn't disenfranchise people. I don't want to lose out on the gains that we've made in same-day voter registration in the jail because of the virus. But I'm not totally sure what the workaround is. And I don't think a lot of the election authorities are neither. I've had a conversation with the Chicago Election Authority, and it was kind of like just touch and go.
Mm-hmm.
And Lance over there mentioned that we're definitely going to have to do absentee, and he's not sure what the workaround is either. So if there's anybody, experts on here who have some ideas on how we could do it, I'm open to hearing it. We definitely need some support and at least a thought partner in that component. And also, I didn't know you guys were partnering with jails downstate to make sure this was happening, which is good to know. We should connect on that. We just FOIA'd a lot of jails and prisons around the state to make sure that they did it. And we're working with the League of Women Voters right now to try to develop a formal partnership so they can train jails downstate. So we should probably just open up that partnership a bit so we're in better communication. That's great. We really appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate both the hopeful note of like when it works well, it works great, and also the reality check of like what the situation is right now and the call to action for us all to partner together to figure out how to best make sure folks can exercise their franchise. With that, I want to see, Justin, is there any parting things you want to leave our audience with from Asian Americans Advancing Justice? Sorry, was it hard to hear me? Oh, you're not unmuted. That'll do it.
There we go. Thank you.
I'm the tech queen today.
No, I appreciate it. Yeah. I mean, I think really just that sober assessment that things are going to look different in November. And I think I'm also trying to be measured in planning around a worst case of a potential fall resurgence, and wanting to make sure that we build enough of an infrastructure to support folks getting the chance to vote and be heard around these potential sort of worst case scenarios. And so I think, just really taking a look at what we can do now to start building up some of that infrastructure to make sure that we've got supplies for in-person voting, that we don't shrink the vote footprint, make sure that folks know how to access their ballots by mail and how to get the right ballot in the right language. And just to make sure that folks are feeling really engaged around this process. I think all policy work is better informed by the more active participation of community members, because everybody's voice, everybody's experience brings a different piece of the puzzle together and helps us make better decisions on what we're advocating around and what we're planning around. So I think I'm just really excited that so many people showed up today to participate in this, and seeing all the comments in the chat of folks that are already election judges. yeah, I think I'm just really, there's a lot to get ready for around November. And I'm, as soon as y'all brought up redistricting, the part of my brain where I had compartmentalized the fact that I'm already working on our redistricting, just like woke up. And so then it was just like, hey, don't forget about this part too, because that's absolutely crucial for our communities going forward. So.
Thanks, Justin. Representative Robinson, I wanted to see if you had anything you wanted to leave our audience with as well.
First of all, thank you for taking the time out to join this important call that we're talking about voting in November, but we also need to make sure that we all are being counted in the census. It's extremely important that we go online, we either mail the form back in, or we call the census. We all have to make sure that we get counted. We can lose congressional seat, which also means that that's funding, particularly in minority communities. And so, yes, we're talking about November, which is extremely important, but the now is the census. And so please make sure that people are being counted. And thank you to the callers and the organizations for all the great work that you're doing. Terry chimed in. Terry's doing some great work. It was great being on the call this afternoon. Again, making sure that we get more people to become election judges. I know there's a few election judges out there right now, so thank you for the great sacrifice that you're doing. And I look forward to champion these efforts in Springfield. And so if I could be helpful to anyone on this call, you can email me at lamont@lamontjrobinson.com. Again, that is lamont@lamontjrobinson.com. Emily, thank you so very much, and to everyone, stay well.
Of course. Thank you so much, Representative. Again, thank you to Justin and Stevie. We will share resources from all three of our wonderful speakers in the follow-up email today, as well as the recording from today's conversation. I especially want to note today's chat had a lot of not just questions, but like really interesting information and resources. That will be in the recording today. So if you missed the chat, you can scroll through to get that info. Again, thanks to all of you for being here. We will be doing what's likely to be our last town hall next Tuesday. Look out in your inboxes for info on that. It's a pretty exciting one, even though I'm kind of sad that I'll miss you after the Tuesdays following. But yeah, thank you all for being here, and we'll see you soon.